The samurai warrior of feudal Japan has been a pop culture staple for decades. Brave, disciplined, skillful, loyal, and above all, honorable samurai have appeared as the heroes of beloved films, novels, television shows, and even comic books. But as is often the case, the reality is way more complicated and way more fascinating than the fiction. Today we're going to take a look at what life was really like as a samurai in feudal Japan. But before I get started, be sure to subscribe to the Japanophile Journeys channel. After that, I would be much obliged if you would leave a comment and let me know what topics you would like to hear about. Okay, let's head back to feudal Japan. The word samurai is derived from the Japanese word subaru, which means to serve. Both the word and the warrior class that it describes came into being around the 8th century, or what's known as Japan's Heian period. For comparison, this was about the same time knights were going on crusades over in Europe. The role evolved over the years, and by the 12th century the samurai would begin to resemble the culture-disciplined warrior that we are familiar with today. Before the Heian period, Japan's imperial court built their military by drafting inexperienced and generally unreliable peasants. At the same time, the country's nobility were employing highly trained private soldiers. By the end of the 8th century, the government began to integrate these elite warriors into the nation's military establishment. These men were the first samurai. The birth of the samurai order changed everything. The military was quickly replaced with what were, for all intents and purposes, professional mercenaries. This made enlistment popular with elites and lower aristocrats seeking employment and valuable training. These changes also meant that noble families had increasing influence over military policy, which, as you might imagine, they were really happy about. In the mid-12th century, the Minamoto clan defeated the Taira clan in the Genpei War of 1180. The fallout of this victory was enormous. The government became a military dictatorship under the command of Minamoto Yoritomo, the first shogun. His reign would usher in what is now known as the Kamakura period of Japanese history. The shogun dispersed networks of loyal samurai throughout the country. They served as royal vassals who maintained order in the provinces and ran local governments on the shogun's behalf. This tightening of military control would continue into the 13th century, when the invasions of Mongol Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, forced the whole country to band together under the shogun. If you were going to be a samurai, you needed to start young. How young? Well, one famous spiritual guide from the medieval era recommended encouraging bravery from the time of infancy. Children who were part of the samurai class could start learning the basics of fencing with wooden swords as early as 3 years old. Yeah, you heard right, 3. And while in today's society you need to be 18 to see an R-rated movie, medieval samurai kids would be fighting with real lethal blades by the time they were 5 years old. Anyway, training was underway before the age of 10, and boys would often be sent to special schools where they studied the samurai philosophies of spirituality, literature, weaponry, and conflict. Samurai were bound to maintain loyalty to the shogun and to the daimyo, who were the feudal warlords that ruled the various regions of Japan. These daimyo were supposed to rule their territories with wisdom and benevolence. But, as you probably guessed, things didn't always go that way. In reality, many daimyo were corrupt, power-hungry, and determined to expand their regions through any means necessary. This often made life as a samurai a bit challenging. Being honor-bound to carry out the orders of a malevolent lord could take its toll on a samurai's good name. Over time, the samurai class as a whole earned a reputation for lawless, vicious behavior. Samurai were powerful and respected, but technically they were not nobility. Under medieval Japan's rigid caste system, the samurai were part of a special military class that was treated more like merchants. This meant they faced many of the same financial challenges as merchants, and steady employment could be hard to come by. Complicating life for a samurai was that different shoguns would enact different rules governing their status. For example, one shogun defined samurai as an elite body, which sounds pretty cool until you realize it was just a way to extend the limits of his power over them. This kind of proclamation could make it more difficult to earn a living without putting a single extra cent into a samurai's pocket. While Zen Buddhism didn't arrive until the 12th century, Japan had known of Buddhism, in general, since the 6th century. With heavy restrictions on the cultivation of birds and animals for food, the religion led the country to embrace a diet heavy in fruits, vegetables and grains, especially rice. As noted previously, samurai often struggled economically. This, in addition to the strict moral code, made them frugal eaters. While the aristocracy and the military elite dined at banquets that served the finest food and drinks, the samurai, like the peasant, relied on husked rice as a staple. This rice was supposed to be provided as rations by the respective lords. If expecting to go into battle, a samurai might supplement their diet with abalone, chestnuts and kelp. When it came to beverages, samurai were allowed to partake in Japan's most widely consumed alcoholic beverage, the rice wine known as sake. Hey, if you were to lay down your life for your boss without hesitation, you might want a stiff drink too. Samurai were expected to be up at 4 in the morning for the rigid and exhausting training regiments. And then, if they weren't in battle or otherwise seeing action, they were required to spend their time studying. Being a skilled warrior in feudal Japan required expert-level knowledge of martial arts and weaponry. Samurai always fought with blades of various types, but their arsenal still evolved over time. Early samurai preferred fighting with spears. Medieval samurai, who mostly traveled on horseback, were partial to bows and arrows. The famous samurai sword, called a katana, became popular during the Kamakura period. Along with the bow, it would remain the samurai's predominant tool well into the 15th century. But studying wasn't just about becoming deadlier. It was believed that the stability and patience required for successfully learning the martial arts would improve one's sense of composure. Whether or not it really worked is anyone's guess, since records show that samurai were often, shall we say, less than composed when dealing with the peasantry. Going all the way back to the Heian period, samurai armor was extremely flexible. Iron plated with leather or strips of bronze were finely crafted by artisans using advanced tools. As technology continued to develop and new resources became available, samurai armor evolved with it. Over time, the armor became increasingly more elaborate, which had the side effect of increasing its weight. One type of armor, called the yoroi or o-yoroi, consisted of a multi-part skirt, a cuirass, shoulder pads and a helmet. Altogether, it weighed over 60 pounds. Those samurai helmets, called kabuto, were made from iron and steel. They covered the head and had head flaps that provided protection for the neck. The helmets were carefully sculpted and highly decorated. A daimyo warlord, for example, might wear some sort of animal iconography. Apparently, branding has always been important. If a samurai wanted to wed, they needed the approval of someone who was the same or higher social rank than the person they wanted to marry. For samurai of higher ranks, marriages had to be arranged, and those of lower ranks often had arranged marriages as a formality. Marriages were usually arranged within the samurai class, although the lowest-ranking members were allowed to marry commoners. While women had vast freedoms and rights during the early days of the samurai, society grew more patriarchal over time. By the 13th century, the husbands had control over their households and their wives. Divorce was permitted, and having a second or even third marriage was not unusual. Medieval tales of samurai were passed down orally before being transcribed into written works, often characterized by detailed accounts of military engagements and the warriors who fought them. Samurai seeking guidance in combat or military service often turned to these stories. The samurai also featured in Japanese mythology. One popular myth, frequently performed in kabuki and no theaters, tells of General Yoshitsune, whose brother, the shogun, became so jealous of his reputation that Yoshitsune was forced to flee. Zen Buddhism, introduced in the 12th century, became deeply intertwined with samurai life. Its strict regimen and emphasis on meditation complemented the disciplined, controlled lives of the samurai. The physical endurance required for Zen meditation appealed to the samurai's desire to test their strength. Perhaps most importantly, Zen Buddhism offered the samurai a philosophical framework to confront mortality, essential for those whose profession was to face death in battle. Over time, the samurai developed the moral code known as Bushido, or the way of the warrior. A samurai's primary loyalty was to his daimyo and then to the shogun, but his first duty was always to protect his family and honor his ancestors. A key aspect of Bushido was maintaining composure and not allowing personal suffering to interfere with public duties. This stoicism became legendary, exemplified by stories such as the one about a samurai whose young son died unexpectedly. When asked by the shogun how his family was, the samurai calmly replied that everything was fine and continued his duties as if nothing had happened. The shogun praised the man's self-restraint and the excellent upbringing provided by his family.